The Incas, their language and writing, the official language was known as Quechua, or Quechua. That was the name that they gave their language. They did not have an official written language, or actually no written language. Their way of language and communicating non-verbally was actually used in things called quipu, which were used for government record keeping. And those are basically, it was a string with other vertical strings used with knots. And the knots and the color of the strings represented different things. So for example, yellow would represent gold, like how much gold they might have, where red might represent the number of soldiers that they have. So they didn't have necessarily like an ink to pen or an ink to paper type written system, but they did have a type of record keeping system using this series of ropes and knots. And depending where those knots were on that rope meant certain different things. They would use the knots obviously to keep for keeping count, as well as other types of information that they'd want to keep. So different colors meant different things, and different knots meant different things, and the different locations of the different knots meant certain things. It's quite ingenious and unique. Their economy was run by the government, very strict, practically a communal type system or a dictatorship. The government controlled all parts of the trade, of the expansion, of the everything basically. People really could not have their own companies or their own businesses there. It was all ran by the government. The government basically, you are a part. As part of the Incan Empire, you were considered a family, and that family was broken up into different parts. So they had something called the alu, which would be like an extended family, or an extended family, and it would be broken up into different groups. So you'd have a small family group of 10, and in that group you'd have 10 groups of 10, which would be 100, and then you get into 1,000 and 10,000. So depending on, let's say for example, a project, if the government has a project for you, they would call upon your family to complete this project. And depending on how big the project was would determine which part of your family would go. Would it be just the 10 people of the small group of family, or would it be a bigger project like building a canal, which would require the 1,000 people of your family, which would include your group and 100 other groups, in order to get enough people to complete that project. Things that they did in these families where they'd build irrigation canals to help with their agriculture and getting water around. Terrace farming, as you kind of saw with Machu Picchu, we'll go back for a second here, you can see that there's different levels of buildings. Those are called terraces. Well, they did the same thing with the farming, where they would actually build these terraces, but instead of putting houses there, they would put crops there. So you might be responsible for changing the layout of the land to make these flat areas so that you can farm, and they would be like steps. Different steps would be for the different farming. They would also use create food and distribution centers, or some type of storage facility that these family groups would have to make as well. One other thing that was interesting about the Incas when it came to their food and food distribution, they prepared and planned for bad crops, which is interesting in the fact that, let's say they had a bad season of growth in their crops. Well, they actually had buildings where they would have freeze-dried food that they would distribute to all their people upon need, if they could not get it through their normal farming needs. So if they had a drought one year, or it was too cold and their crops froze, or whatever the case may be, they would have these places where people could go and get the food they needed to survive. Even the elderly were taken care of. The idea is, because the Incas are because you're taking care of the Incan society, they'll take care of you. Every year you and your family are required for a certain number of days to work on some particular city project or government project. Because of that, because you help the city and you help the community, you are rewarded with some of these benefits. The fact that you will never starve and go hungry. Another interesting thing about this, and it's a little side off of the economy, but it deals with conquering land. if the Incas would come into your city and want your city, they would give you a choice. They will basically say, join us, and you can keep your religion, you can keep your customs. All we ask is that we build a government building here, and you agree to be in allegiance with us. You can have your leaders, keep your leaders, but we are ultimately the ones in charge. And they would do this without having to fight these other cities. And a lot of these other cities would take them up on their offer, basically saying, yeah, we don't want to die, we don't want to fight, we think we'll lose, so yes, you can take over, you can be our leaders as long as we keep our people. And it was very peaceful. Very rarely was there a battle fought when it came to this type of conquest and expanding the empire. So keep that in mind, that these people they didn't want war. They wanted people to like the Incas. And the Incas were a pretty good government up until towards the end, when there was some conflict when one of the leaders had died. You can get more information in your book about that, on how the emperor had died and his two sons had taken over. But the book talks a little bit in detail about that near the end of section 4. As I just mentioned, the government had total control over the economic and social life. The territory was divided into smaller, manageable units. Think of it like an entire country that's split up into states, and those states are split up into cities, and those cities are split up into villages. Same kind of thing here. And depending on, and each one had kind of their own main master city. While in those areas, they would build these cities and schools in these conquered areas to teach people that they had conquered about the ways of the Inca. Kind of like what we do today in a lot of countries, including the United States. The idea that even in our schools, we teach them about our government, our constitution, our way of life, so that people will understand it, respect it, promote it, and teach it on to their kids and others as well. So it was a very strictly managed government on how they divvied up the land, ruled the land, and was trying to ensure the continuation of the empire through education. And religion. They had fewer gods than the Aztecs, for example. They did have some key gods, though. They had their ultimate god, the creator god, known as Virichikoa, who created all things. But the other important god was their sun god, Anti, or Aniti. Basically, the belief was that the leader, the emperor, was a descendant of Aniti, and it was of 11 families. There were 11 families that are supposedly direct descendants of this sun god. And from those 11 descendants, they would choose the leader, as long as you were in, or from 11 families rather, that a leader would be chosen from one of these 11 families who's related to the sun god. They would also have these young men and women that were unmarried, and sometimes were called upon for a lifetime of religious service. Think of them as like priests, clerics, things like that. They were married. They were sometimes known as the virgins because they were unmarried, and they were required and expected to perform a lifetime of duty for religious purposes, relating to different ceremonies, practices, things like that. Achievements, our last slide. Again, they did not have iron or the wheels, just like the Mayans or the Inca or the Aztecs. Did not have the wheels, did not have any iron tools. So a lot of this stuff was done by hand with other rocks or other tools. If they wanted to transport different rocks and stone, they had to do it by hand, lift it up and carry it, because they didn't have the wheels for carts. They did create this ingenious 14,000-mile long road system that connected all the cities together. And it was interesting because they had their own little Pony Express thing going there, where if they needed to get information from one city to the next, these roads were designed to allow for a runner to transport or literally run between the cities to send out these messages. So very early use of a primitive mailing system that the government set up. And with that, we are done with our lecture 4. I hope you enjoyed it and got some information out of it that you can use on your test. Remember that your test is coming up shortly, and you can use a lot of this information to help you out. Please make sure you are filling in all parts of your Chart 1, since a lot of your test is based on that chart and understanding that chart. As always, make sure that if you do have any questions, please let me know, and I would be more than happy to help you out. So, continue to be awesome, and have a great day.